Hey guys, let's get started talking about outliers. I have a PowerPoint that I'll link for you, and then I will also be scrolling through some of the text, and then for some things I'll just literally hold up my book and read it with you, so have your book follow along. You can also access the book online if you do not have a copy. Okay, so we're really using this book to look at argument and to look at the structure of Gladwell's argument. Okay, I couldn't make the PowerPoint work. Here we go. So in the introduction, the first thing we're going to do, okay, is talk about the introduction. We're going to pull that up in a second. But if we looked at how this is set up, first of all, we have the definition of what an outlier is. We're going to talk about the Rosetto case study and what is its purpose. The explicit purpose that Gladwell gives us of outliers, and then let's think about some criticism as well, and what logical fallacy is here. And then as we go from here, think about how the book is split up into its two parts, and then how those parts are split up into chapters. All right, so let's look at the text itself. Maybe not. Okay, it's back on screen here. I think we're good. I think you see me. All right, so in the introduction, we start off with these people were dying of old age. That's it. That is an epigraph, which is a short quote, poem, prayer, Bible verse, something that is outside of the text that is used to sort of maybe be part of the hook or give us that reminder of what the chapter is going to be about later. The structure of the introduction, we have, if you look up at the top here, you can see part 1 and part 2. That we've got, first of all, the definition of an outlier, something that is situated away from or classed differently from a main or related body, or a statistical observation that is markedly different in value from the others of the sample. So look at how Gladwell will take that denotation, that dictionary definition of outlier, and bring it through his argument. Okay, so let's think about why this might be divided into two sections. In the first section, he's got this anecdote about Rosetto Val Fortori and where it lies in Italy. Lots of description, lots of background as we get started. And then we get sort of here, life was hard, the townsfolk were barely literate, hope for economic betterment. So maybe there's some keys to the motivation and the success that this group of people are going to have. As we go a little bit further, we are introduced to, let's see, before we get here, on page 5, let's make sure it's the same in your book. Yes, we're introduced at the bottom of page 5 to, once we have this group of people that are in Rosetto, Pennsylvania, its own little self-sufficient world, it might have remained, but for a man named Stuart Wolfe. And then we get the description. Wolfe was a physician. This is what he studied. He studied digestion. And on the next page of the introduction, we get this quote here that says, and while we were having a drink, he said, you know, I've been practicing for 17 years. I get patients from all over the world. I rarely find anyone from Rosetto under the age of 65 with heart disease. And so, that's an interesting fact. That appeals to our curiosity. And Wolfe was, of course, taken aback as well. So he decides to investigate. Here we get the process. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying, how is the argument set up? How is the information presented to us? So here we have a shift. We get a description of the process, personal commentary of the researcher in there. And then, of course, we get the results were astonishing. So if we are reading this, we are the audience, and we're like, okay, why were they astonishing? What is it that is happening here? Wolfe brings in his friend. And so these, of course, are the results. I hired medical students, sense of amazement. These people were dying of old age. That's it, which is, this is answering the results. And then, of course, we see that right there. That's the observation. Okay, so we get this sort of curious situation, the process of the researcher, and then the observation. And then, of course, look what's tied in here. Rossetto was an outlier. And we think back to that definition of outlier, which was something that is situated away from or classified differently from a main or a related body. Okay, and it's different than statistical examples. So in the first part of the introduction, we have the insight that we get through Stuart Wolf, and we get the application of the definition of outlier, this introduction here to the Rossetto case. Then what happens in part 2 of the introduction is that we get Stuart's theory sort of tested and refuted. This is going to come to mirror what Gladwell does in each of the chapters that follow, and then we're going to have the final conclusion. Okay, so you have this little division up here. If we go through, notice the order. Wolf's first thought was that the Rosettans must have held on to some dietary practices. Okay, so this kind of goes through like the assumptions that we would have had, right? As a researcher, as a doctor, these things were going on. Then Gladwell, in continuing to think about the quandary, in fact, they weren't exercising. Sorry, did not mean to highlight that. They weren't exercising. They weren't eating great, and they were smokers. They were obese. And then things that we typically consider, right? Okay, it's not diet. It's not exercise. Then what's the finding? Then what about genetics? Question that, okay, right? So think about, thinking about what a researcher, what we might assume about the situation, and then debunking that. All right, so they didn't have tracked down relatives to see if they had the same remarkable good health. They didn't. He then looked at the region, another dead end. What Wolf began to realize was that the secret of Rossetto wasn't diet or exercise or genes or location. All right, going back through all of those and adding in a little polysyndeton, right? Sort of emphasizing all of those things that we might have thought would have been that. It had to be Rossetto itself. Who's W? That is Wolf. Wolf's claim there. We go a little bit further. In transplanting Pisani culture of southern Italy to the hills of eastern Pennsylvania, the Rosettans had created this powerful, protective social structure capable of insulating them from the pressures of the modern world. They were healthy because of where they were from, because of the world they had created for themselves. There's our conclusion, right? Cause and effect. So if we looked at Wolf's approach, hypothesis, testing, negative results, the negative results were, of course, looking at diet, exercise, location, and all those dead ends. And then finally, it had to be, it's just an outlier, right? It's the place itself. This is going to mirror Gladwell's approach in his own, sorry, didn't mean to highlight that, in his thing. Okay, I cannot scroll down a little bit for you there. Okay, not sure what's coming at the end of that, but if I will just read to you from here. You can imagine the skepticism that, of course, these doctors faced. They have to go to a group of highly educated people, experts in the field, and say things like it was a mysterious or magical benefit of them talking to one another, having generations under one roof. Again, sort of debunking the things that we typically think about. On page 10, the last paragraph, Wolf and Brunn had to convince the medical establishment to think about health and heart attacks in an entirely new way. Okay, this is like, hello, this is what we're going to be doing with outliers and success, thinking of it in an entirely new way. Notice the anaphora there. They had to get them to realize. They had to look beyond. They had to understand the culture. They had to appreciate the idea. So that anaphora builds up what it is that these people had to do. And then we get Gladwell saying explicitly, in Outliers, I want to do for our understanding of success what Stuart Wolf did for our understanding of health. So his sort of purpose is stated explicitly there. And as we start, let's think about what's his exigence, or sort of what twisted his arm, is sort of poked him to write this story here. If we go back to our PowerPoint, and I think you can still see me, we, of course, have, let's see, let me see this current slide. The purpose of the case study, you've got two central components of Gladwell's argument. One, the methodology will be different, just like Wolf's methodology had to be different. his argument will also emphasize the collective, maybe not just this individual. We're going to look beyond the individual. Of course, yes, that's how Gladwell starts a lot of his stories, with a particular anecdote, but then he does take it to the larger level as well. So our purpose of Outliers is to look at how success works, and of course how these successful outliers were made. And yes, made, because of course Gladwell is going to end up saying it's not that they have some magical heart or something that gives them their superpowers of whatever division they are outliers in. If we looked at the criticism, if we said, wanted to find fault with this argument, we could say that Gladwell is, focusing in on this anomalous anecdote rather than social science itself, and you can make that that criticism. If you look at the divisions of his parts and splitting the parts into chapters, of course, each part has a claim. So the first part, I know in block 4 we talked about this, maybe not block 1, it's about opportunity and how successful people are successful, not because, again, they have an amazing brain or heart or athletic ability or whatever, but the opportunity that they were in has given them that step up in whatever way that it is in each of the chapters. Each part has a claim, and then within each part, these chapters themselves have different claims that support the idea of opportunity. So look at, as you keep going now, look at how those work, but then also figure out, okay, what is the claim in part 2, and how do those chapters each represent a claim there. All right, let's see what we're doing here. All right, so looking at part 1, of course, is opportunity. These are the chapters that are in there, and then part 2 we'll kind of get to next week. If we look at the structure of the chapter, I'm not sure where this is going. Let's go ahead and sort of jump to chapter 1. I'm just going to take my book and my annotations and talk on this PowerPoint. I hope that doesn't bother you too much. My kids say that my voice is annoying on here, and oh well, that's what it is. What you can also do is use sort of the page. I'll show you mine. It's backwards, yes. At the beginning of the part or somewhere in your notes, make a list of those, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go to what is it that he's talking about in the first one. So in chapter 1, I just wrote age dash birth month because that is what is important, as well as this idea of meritocracy that's in this first chapter. All right, so chapter 1 starts on page 15, I believe, in all of our books. And it's called the Matthew Effect. It starts with a biblical reference. And this is, again, an epigraph. And for unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And this is kind of enigmatic to think about. Kind of puzzling. It's true, but why? Why is that the case? Now, if we think about what appeal that might be, we can think about it's got a serious tone. It could possibly be an appeal to ethos, sort of building some credibility in that it brings up tradition and associating himself in his argument with tradition. You may also argue that it is an appeal to logos as well, and making this connection there. Okay, so notice that we start again with a narrative. That is narrative, anecdote. You can say that those are organizational strategies. Okay, so why might he start this way? If we think about the Medicine Hat Tigers, it creates a mood for us, right? Maybe of curiosity, of interest. Maybe it establishes sort of a scene, background. It helps us to tie into something. Just like the Rosetta mystery gave us something to tie into, this does the same thing. Same organizational strategy as the intro. Okay, so if we turn and look at page 16, if you look at the bottom, we get the definition of meritocracy. Canadian hockey is a meritocracy. Thousands of Canadian boys begin to play the sport at the novice level before they are even in kindergarten. All right, so if we looked and we kind of went through the bottom of page 16, you could circle words like novice level, every age, sifted, sorted, evaluated, separated out, groomed for the next level, reach their mid-teens, they're channeled. And then it talks about the top of the pyramid. And it says a junior or a team plays for the Memorial Cup. That means you are at the very top of the pyramid. So what we're going to see, we had our example with these Tigers.